Joining us now for tonight's big close-up is U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. And I want to ask you right off the top, what do we expect from this meeting tomorrow? Do we expect decisions to be made, or do we expect that this is just the next step in the process?
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you all tonight. I think it is an important next step in the process because this war needs to end. There needs to be a peace deal, and the killing needs to stop. And that's been President Trump's #1 goal all along. I think you're going to see, first of all, if Zelenskyy and his team come to the White House with a proposal, a counter proposal to what Russia proposed in Alaska, that would be an important next step. Obviously, President Trump is mediating this situation, trying to see if he can bring both sides to the table. He has them at the table. Now we got to see if he can bring both sides to an agreement. I think the security guarantees that were mentioned obviously are going to be crucial. Ukraine's going to have to not only understand the security guarantees that they need and explain those to the NATO allies, but the NATO allies are going to have to be willing to step up, and that's why they're at the White House tomorrow as well. And then finally, I think President Trump is going to have to evaluate, based on everything he hears from the Europeans and from Ukraine, as to whether there is a next step to take. And if so, what is that next step? And is it a trilateral meeting with Zelenskyy, Putin, and President Trump himself? And so, big agenda tomorrow.
Ambassador Katie Pavlich here. Thanks so much for coming on the show. So the president has done a lot of work when it comes to getting NATO to pay their fair share, to take the Russia threat seriously. And it took Russia invading Ukraine for them finally to wake up on their continent and say, actually, security for us is really important. And the president was able to get that 5% agreement and commitment from most countries outside of Spain during his meetings at NATO in June. So how is his work with NATO to make it stronger by holding them accountable for what they agreed to in the alliance played into the meeting tomorrow and where Ukraine and Russia go from here?
Well, first of all, we've worked very hard to make NATO strong. It's as strong as it's ever been, quite frankly. And Katie, I would also just mention there is no Spanish footnote. All 32 allies signed up for the same agreement at the summit. And so there is no second class of NATO allies. Everybody's agreed to 5%. And that 5%, by making NATO stronger, more lethal, that's what I think is one of the reasons Putin has come to the table. Because remember, NATO has been also coordinating the sale of American armaments to our European allies that are being provided currently on the battlefield in Ukraine. And I'm, helping coordinate that as well. And so I think NATO and its strength certainly is one of the reasons that this is as close as it's ever been to having a peace deal on the battlefields in Ukraine. But at the same time, both sides are going to have to agree. And so that's why I come back to my first point, and that's got to be Ukraine has to say what their response to the Russian proposal that came out of Alaska. And President Trump briefed that on the flight back to Ukraine and to our NATO allies from Europe. And at the same time, I think he's going to bring a proposal himself. And so we'll see. Again, President Trump is mediating this and seeing if there's a deal to be had, because there's no better deal maker, obviously, no better peacemaker than President Trump.
Ambassador Jason Chaffetz here.
Hey, Jason.
Your relationship there as the ambassador to the United Nations, or to the NATO forces there. This is, from Putin's viewpoint, this is really problematic because Donald Trump has done more to support and grow NATO than just about anybody else. But I think that was one of the concerns, was Ukraine going to join NATO? How does that work? Because if the U.S. is going to provide security forces or guarantees, but that has to be done with NATO. I mean, this is not our war. We didn't start it. We're trying to help end it. But what do you think is the biggest impediment, and how does that whole NATO piece play into this?
Yeah, well, certainly NATO has the security architecture in Europe, and that's important and crucial for our European allies together with Canada. But at the same time, it's been very clear that any security guarantees would be outside of NATO, even if the United States were participating in those security guarantees. Today, Steve Witkoff mentioned Article 5 like security guarantees. You know, Article 5 in the NATO context says an attack on one is an attack on all. And so I would guess, you know, if there are boots on the ground, a coalition of the willing that includes countries like France and Germany, Great Britain, and possibly the United States, that you know, same type of attack on one, attack on all would be part of it. And Ukraine would be obviously part of that coalition of the willing on the ground there in Ukraine. So that's how I would see it working. But obviously that's one of the crucial things tomorrow's White House meeting is going to consider.
Ambassador Kevin Corke, great to have you with us tonight. Historic,
hey, Kevin.
Political, economic, and military. There are a number of different ways to sort of approach this circumstance. I want to focus on the economic and what our partners in Europe really will bring to the table. What's your expectation tomorrow, and how can collectively the globe shape what happens from here moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think you have the situation with the conflict and what the economic situation that includes things like sanctions, tariffs, and the like. You saw that India, because of their buying so much of the Russian oil, has been hit with extra tariffs. And so those are important. And obviously the European Union is considering another package of sanctions and tariffs. But at the same time, I think we need to start thinking a lot about, Kevin, to your point, about the rebuilding of Ukraine, about you know, what their economy looks like post-war. They're going to certainly be a large provider of military equipment to Europe as they spend this 5% that they all agreed to. And so that's going to be crucial. But at the same time, they're going to have to rebuild their ag economy as well. They're you know, obviously the breadbasket of Europe. And so that's going to be important, and their ports and their infrastructure. And so there's going to be a lot of money pouring into Ukraine, primarily from Europe, to help rebuild.
All right, Ambassador Matt Whitaker, thank you so much for joining us tonight and discussing all of this with us. All eyes certainly on the White House tomorrow.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie.
Okay, so very, very high stakes meeting tomorrow at the White House, and great explanations of things by the ambassador. Before we get into what he said, I want to take you guys back to April 26th. We were on the panel together. It was you, me, and Jason. Katie, you weren't here, but I'm going to get you in on this.
Okay, great.
And on that day, Kevin asked us all a question. Let's take a listen.
I'm going to ask you all a yes/no question, maybe a comment. Does this get resolved this year? Yay or nay? Talking about Russia and Ukraine, does it get resolved?
Yes.
Yeah, I sense a frustration by President Trump, and I think that frustration will lead to more ramifications for each side that they don't want to see. And I think Donald Trump will end it, and will happen before the end of the year. I think it'll happen before the fall.
I think it'll happen too, but I think it's going to take a while to push Zelenskyy over the edge to make this deal, because listen, you're talking about losing part of your country, and nobody wants to see that. It would be like if they said, oh, well, we could end it if you let us take part of Florida. You know, no, we're not. So this is going to take a while, but I suspect you're right. This will probably end this year.
Okay, so we were all in agreement there, but you were spot on about, you know, what Ukraine might have to give up in order to get this deal done.
Yeah.
And boy, that's going to be topic number one at the White House tomorrow, isn't it?
Super tough. And obviously, if you're Ukraine, you want to say, we want to be a part of NATO for just this exact reason. We didn't want this to happen. Georgia has learned. Other nations in that part of the world have all learned the Russians will take a nibble, then a bite, then more. Something's got to give. But I think in this circumstance, maybe, just maybe, something can happen where we can figure out a way to massage our way out of this, because the alternative is devastating.
Yeah, it really is. Jason, you said before the fall, and it's the timing is kind of stacking up that way.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I hope so, because I think, you know, like Donald Trump wants to end this war. I think in his heart of hearts, he does not like the killing. He doesn't want to see, he wants to see this war come to an end, and he's going to do everything he can. We're not at war. We're not in Europe. You know, but we are the world's economic and military superpower, and we can use those levers of our economy. And I think the discussion that happened, I still maintain that the reason they went for nearly 3 hours there in Alaska is because there were broader discussions about Putin and Russia's place in the world, how they work with their economy, and Donald Trump saying, look, you can either come along for the ride, or we can make life very, very difficult for you. Yeah. And I think that's part of the equation. But the Europeans have been part of the biggest impediment to actually getting a deal because of the land and where these lines are going to be drawn.
Yeah.
Katie, I'll have you weigh in, taking into consideration what the ambassador said. What do you think? What are your hopes for happening tomorrow?
Well, going into the meeting, President Trump told Brett Baer that the Russians are bringing a lot of business people. The president has used business and trade as a way to get peace all around the world. So that's certainly something that he's working with. The president, I think, is going to work towards some kind of agreement that both sides will agree to. But it's going to then be up to the Europeans to make sure that Ukraine has those security guarantees, which is why you saw his push at NATO. He said that NATO is now going to buy more American weapons that they're going to transfer to Ukraine. So I think he's going to broker this deal and pass the baton to where it belongs, which is to NATO and to the European partners, even though Ukraine is not technically part of that coalition.
Yeah, and you heard Steve Witkoff talking about Article 5 security guarantees. I mean, that's a big deal, right?
Huge deal. And if you're Ukraine, all you've ever wanted is to be protected. They will pay the price to be protected. We can only hope that cooler heads will prevail.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll be right before the fall. Good analysis.
We'll hold you to it.
That's right. We'll see.
All right, guys, great discussions.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.